It is now my pleasure to introduce Oregon's 34th Chief Executive, Governor Barbara Roberts, who entered community service as an unpaid lobbyist for handicapped children, served on the Park Rose School Board, Mount Hood Community College Board, as a Multnomah County Commissioner, 2-term state representative, first woman majority leader in the House, and was twice elected Secretary of State before becoming this state's first woman governor just short of a year ago, or as Barbara said this morning, 9 months. Governor Roberts has been almost totally absorbed in recent weeks, inquiring into the minds and hearts of Oregonians on a quest that may well result in the biggest restructuring of state government in recent time. Pausing in the midst of her unique conversation with Oregonians and reporting on what she has learned so far is Governor Barbara Roberts.
Thank you very much. I was almost hesitant about touching the microphone, afraid I'd do something to it. You know, I was thinking as I was listening to the panel today that maybe if we really wanted to be the best economically stable state in the nation, we would start a project to invent a foolproof microphone system. If we could do that in Oregon, we would not have any problem with our economy, because believe me, that would be the mousetrap people have been waiting for. It happens all over the state, so I think maybe that's the way we need to do it. I'm going to see if I can leave that down just a little bit there. Don't touch that microphone. I'm very mechanical, it's okay. I know that it's the habit of every governor to suggest that their term of office is the critical point of history that will set the course of the state for decades and decades to come. There's a tendency to use words like crossroads and turning point a lot. That's kind of how governors talk. And I have to admit to you that I'm succumbing just a little bit to that same belief. The belief that the choices we make or don't make over this next year will set the stage for Oregon for the next several decades. What we invest in infrastructure, in education, in research and development, in human resources will shape the state's future. And our ability to make those investments, both private and public, will determine if Oregon remains on the playing field or is sidelined. We have some assets that, if handled correctly, will add to Oregon's economic and social health. Our location on the Pacific Rim is clearly one of those, and Vic mentioned that today. Our natural scenic wonder and what it's doing for the tourism business in this state and encouraging people to move here. A good workforce, it can be better, but it's still one of the best in the nation. A diversifying economy. The breadth of our economy is much different than it was a decade ago in this state. We've got good schools that are ready to accept improvement, and that's an important standard, ready to accept improvement. And the potential for adding to an already good transportation and port system in the state. But we are facing some challenges that could become fatal liabilities if we don't act soon and if we don't act positively. Our need for a new tax system, handling a sharp increase in population, serious infrastructure needs, particularly sewers and waters around the state, a citizenry that is frustrated and growingly disillusioned. You heard that today. We hear it every place we go. The challenges in our timber communities and the need for strong creative leadership at all levels of government and education and business. The challenges are clearly there. We're not short of the challenges. What we do together in the months ahead regarding education and workforce development, livable communities and growth management, and above all, our tax structure, will set the course for literally decades to come. Well, I happen to be an optimist. I believe you can do a lot if you believe you can do it. And in the case of Oregon's future, I believe there's ample reason for that optimism. The most important reason is that Oregon is blessed with incredible natural and human resources, plus a location that is destined to be part of the most vibrant part of the world economy. My other reason for optimism is that I see Oregonians beginning to work together. I see us beginning to agree on our aims and planning together for the future of our state. I have not seen that many partnerships working that positively at any time since I've been involved in this state. 2 years ago at this very conference, the conference was devoted to something called Oregon Shines. It was our state strategic plan for economic development for this state, and there were a number of people in this room who were involved in helping make that happen. The plan was developed, as most of you know, under the leadership of Governor Goldschmidt, but it was built on the Oregon's Future Commission that was started by Governor Atiyeh. So there was this bipartisan understanding of how important it was that we did strategic planning for the state's economy. Oregon Shines presented an opportunity for Oregon and a plan for achieving that opportunity by doing something new. Oregon Shines envisioned a future with diversified economic growth that provided well-paying jobs for its citizenry. It also envisioned that growth occurring statewide at each region of the state as they took advantage of the strengths in their own region. It envisioned Oregon as a place that would accept positive economic growth and a place where quality environment and strong education and human investment programs would support that diversified economy. Well, Oregon Shines is a good document, and it stimulated a great deal of discussion at that 1989 meeting. But in truth, I suspect that seated in this room are many of you who doubted that the vision and the strategies so boldly stated in that document could happen at all or be sustained. Oregon and other states had a very, very long history of developing plans only to bury them on the shelf after the initial flurry of activity. What made Oregon Shines different was the commitment we had to build in long-range planning as an integral part of how we do business in this state, both in government and in the private sector. Oregon Shines was followed by something called the Oregon Progress Board. Assigning the governor as the chair of that board, the legislature charged the board to do what no state has done before ours. Taking a lesson from business, the Progress Board was directed to translate the vision and the strategies into measurable objectives. And the result was something that I mentioned this morning, the Oregon benchmarks. And those Oregon benchmarks were adopted unanimously by the 1991 legislature after review by a number of substantive committees. So they looked at them in a number of arenas like education and economic development. Unanimously, those benchmarks came through this legislative session. AOI and many of its members were there at each step along the way, from Oregon Shines all the way through those adoptions at this legislative session. Now, as the chair of the Progress Board, I want to tell you that we haven't finished the planning process with that legislative adoption of the benchmarks. We have only just begun. It sounds great, but will it translate? Each benchmark now, no matter what it is being assigned to a single person, and they are responsible for making the solutions happen that deal with that benchmark. I took on a small one called the assignment for redoing Oregon's tax structure. That's the one I'm responsible for. Somebody else has one that deals with teen pregnancies, and someone else is assigned one on mental health, and someone else has one on economic development or portions of it. So there's all of these benchmarks, and they're being assigned to individuals and say, you figure out how to make this happen. So I took the easy one. Now, 2 years ago, you may have seen the Progress Board and the benchmarks as just another passing fad that would not survive the Goldschmidt administration. But that has not been true. We are using those benchmarks at literally every agency of state government as part of our budget process, and they are the framework for the priorities that my administration has laid down for the next 4 years. So when we're looking at doing a budget, we say, how does this budget fit with the benchmarks? Because that is the guideline we will be measured against in Oregon. Those benchmarks have clearly already affected legislative priorities as well, and I think that's an even more amazing thing, the commitment that people are starting to feel to a planning document and to a set of tools for measuring that were basically just a few years old and from the legislature's standpoint, even newer than that. We now have a recognized, accepted, and respected arena for planning that includes rigorous measures to hold us accountable for the results of our expenditures and the results of our activities. Yet the very best plan in the world, as you know, is worthless if it's not acted upon. So when I took office, I established 3 pillars for my administration. The 4-year commitment that I have made is linked directly to the Oregon benchmarks. I'd like to take those 3 pillars for just a minute and talk about them very briefly. The first one is one that's clearly stated in the benchmarks and that you have heard several times recently, and that is that we in the state of Oregon will have the best prepared and educated workforce in America by the year 2000 and the best in the nation by the year 2000 and the best in the world by year 2010. Now that is a very lofty and commendable goal, but can we do it? Well, today I will tell you about an hour ago in Washington, D.C., one of my staff people was there accepting an award for Oregon. We were named the State of the Year by the National Alliance for Business because of the 2 pieces that came out of this legislative session, the Workforce Quality Council and the Educational Reform Act. Those 2 pieces were the reason that the National Alliance for Business says this is a state that is willing to step forward and start making a difference. And we are indeed doing that. I was telling at the table when I was at the National Governors Association a couple of months ago in Washington, D.C., in Seattle, people were saying, how could one state in one legislative session get the health care package, the Workforce Quality Council, and the educational reform through? And I said, part of the reason is because we have measurable goals for our future, and we've got to get the job done to show that we can succeed once we've set our goals in place. And I think that is obviously a framework, and it's a long ways from done, but we know what we need to do if we move forward on it now. One of the other pillars that fit in a very broad way as well as a narrow way was something called livable communities. Now, livable communities can be as narrow or as broad as you'd like to define it. For me, it's a very broad definition. It says if I live in a community, what makes that community and the broader community, my state, one that's livable for me? Well, if you looked at that broader definition and you looked at what happened in this legislative session, I think it would be fairly amazing. We know that in order to attract management talent and investment and encourage people to stay who have that talent in Oregon, we need to have communities that people want to live in. Safe, healthy, positive communities. So if you looked at the breadth of that and saw what happened in this legislative session, I think you would be impressed. We set 9 legislative commitments under the livable communities portion of my agenda to come out of this legislative session. They were the light rail project in Washington County, a new housing trust fund to build low-income housing, to settle once and for all in the legislative process the field burning issue and the recycling issue, to set the new mining bill in place so Oregon could move forward with that industry but with the necessary protections, to get the Clean Air Act in this state done so we could meet the federal guidelines and not get caught in a place where we couldn't work and couldn't produce, to get the health care package through, to get the Forest Practices Act through, and to get the secondary lands measure through. 8 of those 9 bills came successfully through this legislative session. So from the standpoint of that breadth of livable communities, we in fact met a number of the guidelines for my administration, but more importantly, we met a number of those that were in the benchmark. Now the third pillar is one that's not going to surprise you very much. It's the issue of tax reform, whatever that means. And what I'd like to do is for a few minutes this afternoon have a conversation with you about the conversation. I'm almost afraid to use that word now. It has new connotations every week. It's been about 2 weeks ago, feeling sort of a pang of anxiety as I started out on the conversation feeling a little worried and a little anxious about trying something as new and as big as a conversation with Oregon. But after those kickoff days, the 4 kickoff days, where we went to 6 cities and more than 5,000 Oregonians came and attended and participated, and more than 3,100 of them volunteered to give us a minimum of 10 hours, it reinforced my belief that the citizens of this state are more than willing to work on Oregon's future if they're given a chance, and if the leadership in this state trusts in their judgment. And that's a very important second factor. If we don't trust them, then this isn't going to work. But I have no doubt that I have tackled one of the toughest jobs of my life. It makes running for governor look like a breeze. This is going to be tough, and I don't have any question. The difference, though, is this time, I won't be being focused on as a candidate. We'll be able to focus our efforts on what we really need to talk about as Oregon citizens. So the conversation with Oregon will only work because citizens in this state like yourself believe in the effort and help us make it happen. Now, I feel good about the process I've chosen. I know there are people who are a little anxious about it. But I think if you think about where we have to end up, which is at the ballot, no matter how we do this, we're going to end up at the ballot. Why would we wait till we got clear to the end of that process and then say, by the way, voters, would you like to come and see what we're doing, when we could bring them along from beginning all the way through the end, which I believe is our best chance for success. But one of the things that's going to make this work and is absolutely critical to the success of this proposal is that if you're going to ask Oregonians to make choices, you can't talk intelligently about those choices and about that change without first understanding the current system of taxation and the current system of services. Or put more simply, where does the money come in and where does the money go out? And what is it spent on? If people don't understand that, then we can't have a conversation about how we're going to make changes that we think are positive. So there's going to be a lot of education and information sharing in this process. What I'd like to do for just a couple of minutes today is to show you 3 charts that are probably out of order up here, but I'll straighten them out, that are part of the educational format, and they'll just take a couple of minutes, but I'd like to show you some of the kinds of tools that we're going to use as we help Oregonians look at their tax structure. So let me see if these are out of order. If I hadn't eaten 2 desserts, I would have done this. Now, I don't know how well you can see that, but let me see if I can kind of give you a sense of it. What you have at the top up here are state government resources. What you have at the bottom are local government resources, both exclusive of federal funds. So we're dealing without the federal funds in either of these cases. These are the monies that Oregonians pay into this structure. Up here in state government, 51% of the dollars we spend that we are taxed as Oregonians go up here to state government. 49% of the taxes we pay at one level or another go down here in local government. What's essential to look at is this red part up here is personal income tax and corporate income tax. There's a little white piece right here that's other taxes. The blue piece down here is the lottery. This is the piece that everybody wants to use to spend to fix everything. So you can see by that little blue line, it's not going to quite make it. What you got down here is the highway fund, gas taxes, and truck taxes. So let me take just a minute now and tell you something about that I think might be useful. If you looked at that, where we get the money from, the personal income tax, corporate income tax, the lottery, the fuel and truck taxes, and the other special taxes and fees like fishing licenses and liquor receipts, that's where the money comes from in state government. And as I said, it's about 51% of what Oregon taxpayers pay each year. And as you can see, most of it comes from the personal income tax system as well as the corporate income tax. But if you get down to local government down there, which is that navy blue color down there, the property taxes from homeowners and businesses and rentals and so forth, that's where that comes from. There are a few local taxes and fees such as hotel taxes and some business licenses and parking fees in some cities. There's the 49% that I mentioned. And clearly, most of local government's revenue comes from that property tax system. So if you looked at that, the state government's personal and corporate income taxes, the red part up there, basically makes up what is called the state general fund. And almost all of the general fund receipts are spent for paying for human resources needs, for schools, for higher ed and community colleges and corrections and public safety, almost all of it. But it also supports some smaller things in terms of that budget, which are the judiciary, the legislature, LCDC, the offices of the Attorney General, the state treasurer, and the governor. And if you looked at that, I guess you could say the general fund is for general needs, because those are basically things that serve all of us in Oregon. And then there are state revenues that have more specific purposes. Those are dedicated state monies. The lottery is a dedicated state fund, dedicated to economic development by the vote of the people in 1984. It cannot be used for any other purpose. So when we cut a human resources need, and somebody says, why don't we pick it up out of the lottery? We can't. The highway fund, the yellow piece down here, gets all of its money from the fuel and truck taxes to build and repair and maintain state highways. It too is a dedicated fund and can only be used for the purposes of those streets and roads and highways. Now, I mentioned that the federal dollars are not up here, and that's another one I want to comment, because it's important to remember that when people talk about the entire state budget, and they frequently do, and they talk about the increase of employees and the increase of that and the increase of that, what they are doing is mixing funds together. They're stirring the lottery and the highway funds and the corporate income tax and the federal dollars into one pot as if we can spend them to serve any of the needs we have, and we can't do that. If they're dedicated, you can't use them. The only part you can use for those general fund needs are the red portions up there, at least under current law and current Constitution. So I think it's important to think about that, and the same is true down here in the property tax. Those basically pay for cities, counties, schools, community colleges, and some special districts like water districts. So what that does is just give you a quick... Uh-oh, I did it. I really did. There, got it. Maybe I'll hold it now. Let's see if I can do this. Got it. Now, the reason for doing that is because too frequently people talk about these things as if they're one big pot and as if we have total flexibility, and they don't take into account special funds, federal requirements, other things of that. So even if you looked at that and said, okay, now I got that part, now how do I explain this to 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 Oregonians so that it's understood? That is part of our challenge, and I believe we can do it. But even once people understand it, if the tax system isn't fair and it isn't equitable and it doesn't meet today's needs, how do you move forward to get people to decide what they want and what they don't want to spend that money on? The rapidly growing population means more people, means more service needs, means more schools, more school children. We've got 40,000 new school children I mentioned in the last 5 years. We've got 166,500 new people in the last 5 years. All of them want some kind of service from either their state or local government, and our job is to figure out what that level of service is that Oregonians are comfortable with. So whether you're talking about population pressures, whether you're talking about other kinds of pressures, it's very clear that we do have needs, and this business community is very, very strong in supporting those needs. You've been there helping on the community college needs, on the local school district needs, with many of the projects that we do in state government. But when Measure 5 passed, this was altered in some ways that I think are significant, and I think the piece that's going to be more difficult is how we help Oregonians understand what that change means without doing what I call a strategy of pain. Now, a strategy of pain is when you say, if you don't give me this tax, this is going to happen to you. Well, you want to guess how many Oregonians believe that? They don't believe it. They've seen magic pots of money come from places they don't understand. And you get a revenue forecast that says there's more money coming in. They said, ha, I knew they didn't have to cut it. They'd find it. They'd never make those kind of cuts. So it's critical that as we go through this process, Oregonians understand what this process will be if we don't get the tax structure corrected. Now let me show you this next chart. What you're looking at from left to right there are 4 biennial budgets, if you will, not with the dollars, but essentially with the percentages up there. The red is local schools and community colleges, both the Measure 5 portion and the portion that we were already paying. And the yellow is state services for other things. What you see in the first one is the 1989-91, what we were like before Measure 5. What you see in the second biennial budget there, the 91-93, is a little bit bigger piece of the pie that's red. That's where the $560 million in Measure 5 got added into the schools and community colleges. What you see in 1993 and 1995, which will be the 93 legislative session, is 1.6 billion new dollars being added into local schools out of the state funds. And you see now that local schools and community colleges, look at how it compares to the yellow for all of the other services we do in state government. And by the time you get to the 1995 budget, 95-97, state government, the yellow piece there, just has a little piece left, and all of the rest is in community colleges and local education. Now, there's nothing wrong with that kind of a commitment to education and to community colleges, but how do you pay for the state services when it gets down to that little yellow piece, or the yellow piece that's even there in 1993-95? How do you keep colleges open? How do you fund state parks? How do you run the Attorney General's office? How do you run the court system? How do you keep the prisons open? Those are the kinds of questions we're going to try to get Oregonians to look at with that new understanding about what Measure 5 in fact really does to the state budget. We're going to try to do it without saying, if you don't give us this, this ugly thing will happen. We think it will become fairly evident as people work with this educational process what will happen if we don't do it. So I don't think we're going to have to point it out. I think they're going to figure it out. So what we're doing now, knowing that we can't do it all easily, and we can't do it on our current tax system, is to try to be clear with our voters and with you about several things. We can make up some of the loss created by ballot Measure 5 by becoming more efficient and by working better in state government. We have the task force that some of your members are serving on to right-size state government. We're looking at reducing duplication and waste and improving the cost-effectiveness of the services we provide. We have a hiring freeze on, I mentioned today, for managers, and we're doing a case-by-case review of every vacancy in state government. We're trying to cut out the fat, and we're trying to work smarter. But even if we did that to the maximum, it won't get us there, because the problem is bigger than just fat and inefficiency. That is the reason for the conversation with Oregon. I believe that Oregonians are willing to pay for public service if they're convinced that the money is not wasted and that the taxes are raised fairly. Plus, if they believe that the things we're paying for have some kind of a common aim and some kind of a common agreement about what we feel as Oregonians are appropriate services at state and local government. Now, there is no question that there is a lot of unrest and unhappiness out there in the public, a lot of mistrust of government and politicians. So our job is twice as hard. This would be a difficult job, even if everybody trusted us. When they don't trust you, it's 10 times harder. So we're trying to do the credibility work at the same time we're doing the information work, and hopefully before we're done, the tax overhaul work. Now, I would say to you that before we finish this process, we will have accomplished several things. We hopefully will be ready to take a measure to the legislature to have it put on the ballot. That will be a big accomplishment. We will have a better sense of what Oregonians want than we've ever had before. That will be an accomplishment. But the other piece that I think is going to serve us well, not just for this election period, not just for this issue, is that we will have done the best job we have ever done of educating the public in this state about their tax structure and the services that tax structure pays for. So I think that it will serve us as we go into the future, because we won't have to wait another 68 years to get tax reform. That's how long it's been since Oregon had a major change in its tax structure. I mean, think about how much the world has changed since 1923. I mean, the hit songs in 1923 were "Yes, We Have No Bananas," and toot toot tootsie goodbye. Now, I don't know how many of you can hum those, but it's probably a small percentage. There are a couple of people I know can, but I mean, a postage stamp cost 3 cents in 1923. The most valuable player in the American League that year was Babe Ruth. That's a piece of history as we see it. And Senator Hatfield was a year old. I mean, so what we need people to do is to look at that tax structure through new eyes, not just to say, put a label on something and you decide if you like it, you either say I love the sales tax or I hate the sales tax, but rather to learn to look at the design of a tax system rather than the label. So that if you looked at a sales tax or an income tax or a property tax or corporate income tax or any other luxury tax, I don't care what you want to call it, if you looked at a tax, you'd look at the design and not the label. If they understand this in this state, and if we can do the job of making the rest of the tax structure design understandable, I promise you that we can get this problem solved. I don't promise you that it'll be easy, and I don't promise you that everybody believes in it, and I don't promise you that everybody will participate. But I believe very strongly that if we're going to get this job done, that lays the foundation for what Oregon will be in the future, that we have to go to the people and get them to participate with us. We're not just looking for another Band-Aid or another quick fix. This is, as we talked about today with the 5 governors, long-range planning with measurable objectives. I don't want Oregon to become like Connecticut and New York and Massachusetts and California that are literally trapped in a day-to-day crisis management, who don't know whether they're even going to be operating next week. They get the short-term headlines, and they're big states in some cases, but Oregon is after something different, not short-term headlines, but long-term economic and social stability. That's the goal. And we can do it if we do this together and if we do it right. While this is occurring, obviously other things are happening at the same time. The Economic Development Department of your state government is continuing to do a better and better job of reaching out there to encourage investment. Steve Peterson is here today. He is doing a remarkable job of helping us look at the options that are available to Oregon and encourage companies to participate and to stay here. But they will come and they will stay more readily if we get these kinds of problems solved. If we have the best workforce in the country and we have the most educated population and we've solved our tax structure, it is not going to be difficult to attract investment into this state. So this is one where everybody wins if we do it correctly. I'm leaving next Sunday to go to Japan. We're continuing to do the kind of outreach that Vic began and that Neil continued, to understand that we have an international economic opportunity and that the prepared workforce and those other things I mentioned are critical. Also, both international and in-country investment is critical, and we're continuing to reach out, including the Waseda University project that will give us an educational link like nothing else in this country. The regional strategies continues to work, and it works because it goes to the people and they're participating in the decision-making for their own future. So I suppose if you looked at that list I gave you this morning during the panel about the honeymoon period and how tough it was, I suppose if I laid that side by side with the optimism I feel about Oregon's future, I think it would be very easy to come down on the side of feeling very good that this is the time in history that I am the governor of this state. I'm very proud of the state. I'm proud of our workforce. I'm proud of the companies who participate with us over and over and over again in communities all over Oregon. In listening to John Shepard, he just reinforced what most of you know so well, that if something's happening in a local community, the businesses community is there helping make it happen. What we've got to do is understand that we're all in this together. We sink or swim together. And I think we have an opportunity to make this the best state in the nation, economically, socially, educationally, and politically. And I hope that you will continue with the strong support that you've given me. A number of your members have been involved in the early part of the conversation. We're not going to ask you to come in at the end. We want you right where you began from the beginning all the way through the process. So So I appreciate what you do for Oregon. I appreciate the kind of quality jobs you supply. And I appreciate your willingness to be part of government when we need you, and that is often. So thank you very much for giving me a chance to be here today.